Imagine this: Buddhist statues carved to look like Greek gods, complete with togas and curly hair, popping up in ancient Afghanistan. Picture a monk, born near what's now Beijing, casually chatting with the King of England and the Pope about military alliances in the 1280s, decades before Marco Polo's stories hit the mainstream. And get this, Viking warriors, known more for raiding, were so into global trade they brought back Arab silver coins by the bucketload, and even Buddha figures from as far as India. Deep in the Sahara, an entire civilization built underground water tunnels longer than Roman aqueducts just to farm and trade with the Roman Empire. Number 10. The Irish monks who accidentally saved Western civilization and maybe found America early. When the Roman Empire crumbled in Western Europe around the 5th century CE, things got pretty chaotic. Libraries burned, schools closed, and a lot of ancient knowledge was vanishing fast. But way out on the edge of the known world, on the green island of Ireland, which Rome had never conquered, something amazing was happening. Irish monks, in their remote monasteries, became the unlikely guardians of Western learning. These weren't your quiet stay-at-home types, well, not all of them. While some dedicated themselves to the painstaking task of copying texts, others felt a burning desire called peregrinatio pro Christo, which means wandering for Christ. They set off in flimsy boats called currachs, made of wooden frames covered in animal hides, with hardly any idea where they were going, trusting God to guide them. One of the most famous of these wanderers was Saint Brendan the Navigator. In the 6th century, he and a group of monks supposedly embarked on an epic 7-year voyage across the Atlantic. The story of their journey, the voyage of Saint Brendan the Abbot, became a medieval bestseller filled with incredible tales of sea monsters, islands of talking birds, and pillars of crystal floating in the ocean. For centuries, people thought it was just a fanciful legend. But then, in the 1970s, a modern adventurer named Tim Severin built a currach using only ancient techniques and materials, and he actually sailed it from Ireland to Newfoundland, Canada. He encountered whales, sea monsters, icebergs, crystal pillars, and found stepping stone islands that matched parts of Brendan's descriptions. Does this mean Irish monks definitely reached America almost 1,000 years before Columbus? We don't have a smoking gun like an Irish monastery ruin in Boston. Some researchers point to tantalizing clues like certain stone carvings found in North America with markings that resemble ancient Irish Ogham script or Native American legends of white-robed man arriving from the east. These are hotly debated, of course. What's not debated is the Irish monks' colossal impact on Europe. As they wandered, they founded new monasteries all over the continent, from France and Germany to Switzerland and Italy. Places like Bobbio in Italy and St. Gall in Switzerland became major centers of learning, thanks to the books and scholarly traditions these Irish wanderers brought with them. They didn't just copy religious texts. They preserved classical literature, philosophy, grammar, and science, works by Virgil, Ovid, Pliny, and many others that might have been lost forever. They even developed their own beautiful and distinctive style of writing called insular script, with its intricate knotwork and animal decorations. So, while the idea of them discovering America is an intriguing what if, their role in saving and spreading knowledge during Europe's so-called Dark Ages is a massive, undeniable fact. They were the quiet heroes who kept the lights of learning on. Number 9. When a Persian prophet's ideas took over from Rome to China and then vanished. Imagine a religion so popular it stretched all the way from the Roman Empire in the west to the heart of China in the east, counting emperors and scholars among its followers. Now imagine it almost completely disappearing from the world. That's the story of Manichaeism, founded by a Persian prophet named Mani in the 3rd century CE. Mani, born in what's now Iraq, believed he was the final prophet in a line that included Zoroaster, Buddha, and Jesus. He preached a powerful dualistic message. The world was a battlefield between a kingdom of light, God, and a kingdom of darkness, Satan. Human souls were particles of light trapped in dark material bodies, and the goal was to liberate this light through a life of asceticism, prayer, and knowledge. Mani was a brilliant organizer. He wrote his own scriptures, created a distinctive style of art to illustrate his teachings. Manichaean illuminated manuscripts are stunning, full of vibrant colors, and sent out missionaries far and wide. His religion was designed to be universal, incorporating elements that would appeal to Christians, Zoroastrians, and Buddhists. And it worked big time. To the west, Manichaeism spread rapidly through the Roman Empire. Even St. Augustine of Hippo, one of Christianity's most important thinkers, was a Manichaean hearer, a lower-level follower, for 9 years before he converted to Christianity and became one of its fiercest critics. Roman authorities, however, eventually saw it as a threat and began persecuting its followers. But where it really took off was eastward, along the bustling Silk Road trade routes. Manichaean communities popped up in Central Asia, and incredibly it became the state religion of the powerful Uyghur Khaganate, an empire of Turkic people, in the 8th century. This gave it a huge boost, and Manichaean temples, art, and texts flourished in places like Turpan, in modern Datianjiang, China. Archaeologists have found amazing Manichaean cave paintings and manuscript fragments there, written in various languages like Parthian, Sogdian, and Old Turkic, showing just how Kamalo this faith became. In China, it was known as Mingjiao, the religion of light, and it survived for centuries, sometimes tolerated, sometimes persecuted, even influencing some Taoist and Buddhist sects. So what happened? Why isn't Manichaeism a major world religion today? Well, being popular with diverse groups also meant it faced opposition from many established religions. Christians, Zoroastrians, Muslims, and Chinese imperial authorities, all at different times and places, cracked down hard on Manichaeans. The fall of the Uyghur Khaganate was a major blow. Gradually, through persecution and assimilation, Manichaeism faded. By the 16th century, it was largely extinct, though some scholars believe its ideas subtly lingered in some later religious movements. It's a forgotten giant, a testament to how ideas could travel and transform ancient societies across vast distances, only to be almost completely erased by time and conflict. Number 8. Those wild Scythians and Celts. Were they secret art buddies across continents? Picture this. Fierce, nomadic horse warriors, called Scythians, roaming the vast steppes of Eurasia, from modern Ukraine all the way to the Altai Mountains near Siberia, between the 7th and 3rd centuries BCE. They were famous for their incredible skill with horses, their golden treasures buried in kurgans, burial mounds, and a super distinct art style. Think intricate goldwork, often featuring dynamic animals like stags with elaborate antlers, coiled predators, griffins, and mythical beasts, all rendered in a powerful swirling style. This animal style art adorned their weapons, horse trappings, clothing, and even their own tattooed skin. Now, travel west to Central and Western Europe. Around the same time and a bit later, roughly 5th century BCE to 1st century CE, here another group of peoples, known collectively as the Celts, were flourishing. Think of groups like the Galls in France, the Britons in Britain, and others. They too had a vibrant artistic tradition, especially known from the La Tène period. And here's where it gets weirdly interesting. Celtic art, particularly their metalwork, like bronze shields, golden torques, neck rings, and sword hilts, often shows strikingly similar features to Scythian art. We see a love for swirling, curvilinear patterns, abstracted animal forms, and a similar kind of dynamic energy. So were these two very different cultures, separated by thousands of miles, somehow sharing artistic ideas. It's not like they were next-door neighbors who could just pop over for a cup of tea and an art class. The Scythians were primarily nomadic pastoralists of the steppes, while many Celtic groups were more settled agricultural societies, though also formidable warriors. Yet, the similarities are too strong for some scholars to ignore. How could this happen? One idea is that there were contact zones, perhaps in Eastern Europe or the Balkans, where Scythian influences might have trickled westward through trade or migrating groups. The Scythians themselves were part of a larger network of steppe cultures, and their influence did reach into parts of Europe. Another possibility is that both Scythian and Celtic art drew inspiration from even older, shared cultural roots, perhaps going back to earlier Indo-European migrations or artistic traditions from the Near East that spread in different directions. Or maybe it was a case of stimulus diffusion. The general idea of animal style, art, spread, and different cultures adapted it in their own ways. We have some tantalizing artifacts that seem to bridge these worlds. The Gundestrup cauldron, a lavishly decorated silver vessel found in Denmark but likely made in Thrace, southeastern Europe, shows Celtic-style figures and motifs, but also includes elephants and lions, animals more familiar to Eastern cultures. The exact nature of the Scythian-Celtic art connection is still debated by archaeologists and art historians, but the visual echoes across such vast distances are a fascinating puzzle, hinting at ancient connections we're still trying to unravel. Number 7. How Japan basically copied and pasted an entire civilization from China and made it awesome. Imagine wanting to upgrade your entire country, from how you write and worship to how you build your cities and run your government. That's pretty much what Japan did starting around the 7th century CE, and their model was the dazzling Tang dynasty of China. At that time, Tang China was like the superpower of East Asia, incredibly wealthy, technologically advanced, culturally vibrant, and with a highly organized government. Japan then, in its Asuka and Nara periods, was a younger nation, just starting to centralize its power and forge a distinct identity. Its rulers looked at China and thought, "We want some of that." So they started sending official diplomatic missions called Kendoshi to the Tang capital of Chang'an, modern Xi'an. These weren't just quick visits. Large fleets of ships would make the dangerous sea journey, carrying hundreds of people, official envoys, scholars, Buddhist monks, students, artists, and craftsmen. They would often stay in China for years, sometimes even decades, soaking up everything they could. Chang'an itself was a marvel, one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world, and it blew the Japanese visitors away. What did they bring back? Almost everything. The Chinese writing system, kanji characters, was adopted and adapted to write the Japanese language. Buddhism, which had already trickled into Japan, got a massive boost, with new schools of thought scriptures and art styles imported directly from China. Japanese rulers tried to implement Chinese style, centralized government, bureaucracy, and law codes. They even built their new capital cities, Heizhou-kyo, Nara, and later Heian-kyo, Kyoto, on a grid plan modeled directly after Chang'an. Think about that, copying an entire city layout. But it wasn't just a simple copy-paste job. The Japanese were very selective and incredibly good at adapting what they learned to fit their own culture and needs. They didn't just take Chinese Buddhism. They developed uniquely Japanese Buddhist sects like Shingon and Tendai. While they adopted Chinese characters, they also invented their own phonetic scripts, hiragana and katakana, to better represent Japanese grammar. Chinese art, music, courtly dress, poetry, and even tea-drinking customs were all imported, digested, and transformed into something distinctly Japanese. This period of intense cultural borrowing laid the foundation for much of what we recognize as traditional Japanese culture today. These Kintoshi missions, though they eventually stopped in the late 9th century as Tang China declined and Japan began to develop more confidence in its own path, represent one of history's most profound and successful examples of wholesale cultural importation and adaptation. It was a nation-building project on an epic scale. Number 6. Sweet potatoes, chickens, and epic ocean voyages. Did Polynesians and South Americans meet way back when? The vast Pacific Ocean, covering nearly a third of the Earth's surface, seems like an impossible barrier for ancient peoples to cross. Yet, the Polynesians, with their incredible double-hulled canoes and sophisticated wayfinding navigation techniques, using stars, swells, and bird patterns, settled thousands of remote islands scattered across this immense watery expanse, from Hawaii to Easter Island to New Zealand. It was one of the most remarkable migrations in human history. But did their voyages ever take them all the way to the shores of South America, thousands of miles to the east? Or did South Americans perhaps sail west? The evidence is tantalizing and fiercely debated. One of the biggest clues is the humble sweet potato. This nutritious tuber is native to the Andes region of South America. Yet, when Europeans first arrived in Polynesia in the 16th and 17th centuries, they found sweet potatoes being widely cultivated on many islands. How did it get there? Archaeologists have found sweet potato remains in Polynesian archaeological sites that date back to at least 1000 CE, long before any European contact. Even more compelling is the linguistic evidence. In many Polynesian languages, the word for sweet potato is something like kumara, kuumala, or umala. This is strikingly similar to kumar or kumal, the words for sweet potato in some Quechuan languages spoken in the Andes. Coincidence? Many researchers think not. Then there are the chickens. Chickens are native to Southeast Asia and were carried by Polynesians on their voyages. For a long time, it was thought chickens only arrived in the Americas with the Spanish. But in 2007, archaeologists at a site called El Arenal in south-central Chile discovered pre-Columbian chicken bones. Radiocarbon dating suggested they were from between 1304 and 1424 C, and DNA analysis initially linked them to Polynesian chicken breeds. This discovery caused a huge stir. Some later studies have questioned the DNA findings or the dating, so the chicken debate is still clucking along. What about other possible exchanges? Some have suggested that coconuts, native to Southeast Asia and spread by Polynesians, might have reached the Pacific coast of the Americas pre-Columbus. Bottle gourds, an African plant that somehow reached the Americas very early, also show up in Polynesia. The famous Norwegian adventurer Thor Heyerdahl dramatically sailed his balsa wood raft, the Kon-Tiki, from Peru to Polynesia in 1947 to show that South Americans could have made the journey. While most scholars now believe Polynesians were more likely the ones to reach South America and return due to their superior seafaring technology and prevailing winds and currents for return voyages, Heyerdahl certainly captured the public imagination. The evidence isn't absolutely conclusive, and the how and who of these potential contacts are still being pieced together. Presence of the sweet potato especially strongly suggests that somewhere, somehow, ancient Polynesians and South Americans met, exchanging not just goods, but a piece of their worlds across the world's largest ocean. Number 5. African kings, Chinese dragons, the surprising bling found in ancient Zimbabwe. When you think of ancient African civilizations, Egypt usually springs to mind. But deep in southern Africa, far from the Nile, another sophisticated society built an incredible city of stone. Great Zimbabwe. Flourishing roughly between the 11th and 15th centuries this city was the capital of a powerful kingdom, home to perhaps 18,000 people at its peak. Its most famous features are its massive stone enclosures, built with carefully fitted granite blocks without any mortar, including the iconic Great Enclosure with its mysterious conical tower. For a long time, European colonizers couldn't believe that indigenous Africans had built such structures, concocting wild theories about lost white tribes or biblical figures. But archaeology has firmly established that Great Zimbabwe was the creation of the ancestors of the modern Shona people. What's truly mind-boggling is not just the architecture, but what archaeologists have found inside these stone walls. Among the local pottery and iron tools, they've unearthed fragments of Chinese porcelain from the Song, Yuan, and Ming dynasties, delicate Celadon wares and blue and white ceramics decorated with dragons and phoenixes. They've also found Persian faience, tin-glazed pottery, colorful glass beads from India, and even a 14th century Syrian glass flask. How on earth did luxury goods from thousands of miles away in Asia end up in the heart of southern Africa, centuries before European ships rounded the Cape of Good Hope? The answer lies in the vast Indian Ocean trade network. For centuries, this maritime Silk Road connected East Africa, Arabia, Persia, India, Southeast Asia, and China. Along the East African coast, a string of bustling Swahili city-states like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Mogadishu acted as crucial trading hubs. Arab, Persian, and Indian dhows, sailing ships, would arrive laden with goods, and African merchants would trade gold, ivory, timber, animal skins, and tragically enslaved people from the interior. Great Zimbabwe, though located inland, was clearly connected to this lucrative coastal trade. It's thought that the wealth and power of Great Zimbabwe came from controlling gold mining and trade routes to the coast, possibly via rivers like the Save. The gold from this region was highly sought after in Asia and the Middle East. So picture this: gold and ivory from the Zimbabwean plateau making their way to Swahili ports, then being shipped across the Indian Ocean. In return, exotic luxury items like fine Chinese porcelain prized for its beauty and durability traveled back, eventually reaching the elite rulers of Great Zimbabwe, who used them as status symbols. These finds completely shatter the old, outdated image of Africa as an isolated continent before European exploration. Instead, they reveal that kingdoms like Great Zimbabwe were players in a globalized economy connected by sophisticated trade networks that stretched halfway around the world. Those fragments of Chinese pottery tell a story of African agency, wealth, and long-distance connections that is far more impressive than any colonial fantasy. Number 4. The Saharan Ghost Empire that piped water under a desert to party with Rome. The Sahara Desert today is one of the harshest, driest places on Earth. But imagine an advanced civilization not just surviving, but thriving right in its heart for nearly 1,000 years, from around 500 BCE to 700 CE. This was the reality of the Garamantes, a Berber people who created a surprisingly sophisticated kingdom in the Fezzan region of southwestern Libya. Their secret: they were master hydraulic engineers. The Garamantes figured out how to tap into vast underground fossil water reserves, aquifers left over from a time when the Sahara was much wetter. They constructed thousands of miles of underground tunnels called fogaras, similar to qanats in Persia, to channel this water to their oases, allowing them to cultivate dates, figs, grapes, wheat, and barley in the middle of the desert. Some of these tunnel systems ran for miles, an incredible feat of engineering that predated or rivaled Roman aqueducts in sheer scale of underground construction. With a stable agricultural base, the Garamantes built towns and a capital city, Garama, modern Gurma, which boasted stone buildings and a population of several thousand. But they weren't just desert farmers. They were also savvy traders. Their oases became crucial stopover points on the emerging trans-Saharan trade routes. They controlled the flow of goods between sub-Saharan Africa and the Roman Empire on the Mediterranean coast. What were they trading? From the south came gold, ivory, precious stones, wild animals for the Roman arenas, lions, leopards, and enslaved people. These goods were then transported north, often by the Garamantes themselves, who were famously described by the Greek historian Herodotus as using 4 horse chariots to raid their southern neighbors, the Ethiopians, a general term for black Africans. They also traded salt, a valuable commodity mined in the desert. Their relationship with Rome was complex. Sometimes they were allies, sometimes enemies. Roman authors like Pliny the Elder and Tacitus wrote about them, often portraying them as troublesome desert raiders. There were military expeditions sent by Rome to curb Garamantian power, but also periods of peaceful trade. Roman luxury goods, pottery, glassware, wine, olive oil have been found in Garamantian tombs, showing their taste for Mediterranean products. In turn, Garamantian goods and the products they channeled from further south reached Roman cities. This Saharan kingdom was a vital, if often overlooked link in the ancient world's economy, connecting the Mediterranean world with the mysteries and riches of inner Africa. So what happened to the Garamantes? Their decline seems to be linked to a couple of factors. The fossil water sources they relied on eventually began to diminish through overuse and a drying climate. Also, the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE disrupted their main trading partner. By the time of the Arab conquests in the 7th century CE, the Garamantian kingdom was already fading. Today, archaeologists are still uncovering the secrets of this ghost empire of the Sahara, mapping their fogaras, excavating their towns, and piecing together the story of how they made the desert bloom and became masters of trans-Saharan trade, all while the Roman Empire was at its height. Number 3. Vikings with bling. How Norse warriors got hooked on Arab silver and Buddhist statues. When you hear Vikings, you probably picture horned helmets, which they didn't actually wear in battle, long ships, and fearsome raids on unsuspecting European monasteries. And yes, they definitely did a lot of raiding. There was a whole other side to the Vikings. They were also incredible explorers, traders, and surprisingly cosmopolitan consumers of international luxury goods. While some Vikings sailed west, discovering Iceland, Greenland, and even briefly North America, many others headed east and south along the great rivers of Eastern Europe on what they called the Ostravagre, the Eastern Way. These eastern-bound Vikings, often known as Varangians, rowed and dragged their ships down rivers like the Dnieper and the Volga. Their journeys took them to the Black Sea and the mighty Byzantine Empire, with its glittering capital, Constantinople, which the Vikings called Miklagard, the Great City. Many Vikings served as elite mercenaries in the Byzantine Emperor's Varangian Guard, famed for their loyalty and ferocity. Further east, via the Volga, they reached the Caspian Sea and traded directly with the Islamic caliphates, particularly the Abbasid and Samanid empires in Persia and Central Asia. These were incredibly wealthy and sophisticated societies, far richer than most of Western Europe at the time. What were the Vikings after? One word: silver. Arab silver coins, called dirhams, were highly prized. They were made of good quality silver and were a recognized currency. Vikings traded furs. Sable, marten, fox, beaver were highly valued. Amber from the Baltic, honey, wax, walrus, ivory, weapons, and tragically enslaved people often Slavs called sokoliba by Arab writers, in exchange for this silver. And they got a lot of it. Archaeologists have found thousands upon thousands of Arab dirhams in Viking hoards dug up all over Scandinavia, from Sweden to Norway to Denmark, and even in Britain and Russia. Some of these hoards contain hundreds or even thousands of coins, often chopped into pieces, hack silver, to be used by weight. These coins weren't just money. They were status symbols, melted down to make jewelry or simply displayed as wealth. But it wasn't just silver. The Vikings developed a taste for other exotic goods. Silk from China and Persia, fine glass beads and vessels from the Middle East, spices, wine, and even fancy clothing have been found in Viking graves. One of the most astonishing finds comes from the island of Helgö in Sweden, an important Viking Age trading center. There, archaeologists unearthed a small bronze Buddha statuette made in Kashmir, northern India, around the 6th or 7th century. How did a statue of Buddha travel all the way from India to Viking Age, Sweden? Probably through a long chain of traders, perhaps via the Persian or Central Asian merchants the Vikings dealt with. Another find, from a Viking boat grave at Oseberg in Norway, included fragments of elaborate silk textiles, some possibly from Persia or Central Asia, woven with intricate patterns. These discoveries paint a picture of the Vikings not just as brutal pirates, but as key players in a vast intercontinental trade network that connected Northern Europe with the riches and cultures of the Byzantine and Islamic worlds. And even further east. Number 2. The monk from China who schooled European kings decades before Marco Polo got famous. Marco Polo's tales of his adventures in China in the late 13th century opened up a world of wonder to Europeans. But what if we told you that just a few years before Polo's return, a man born near modern-day Beijing, who was not European but a Turkic Christian monk, traveled all the way to Europe and had audiences with kings and the Pope? Meet Rabban Bar Sama, a man whose incredible journey offers a reverse Marco Polo perspective, an Easterner's view of medieval Europe. Bar Sama was a Nestorian Christian, a member of the Church of the East, which had spread across Asia along the Silk Road. He was likely of Uyghur or Ongid Turkic ethnicity, and was born in Kambalik, which later became Beijing around 1220, during the height of the Mongol Empire. The Mongols, despite their fearsome reputation as conquerors, created an era of relative peace and security across Eurasia, called the Pax Mongolica, which made long-distance travel safer than it had been for centuries. In the mid-1270s, Bar Sama and his promising student, Rabban Marcos, decided to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. However, due to conflicts in the region, they never reached the Holy Land. Instead, they ended up in Mongol-controlled Persia and Iraq, the Ilkhanate. There, Rabban Marcos was unexpectedly elected as the Patriarch of the Church of the East, taking the name Yabalaha III. This is where Bar Sama's big adventure begins. In 1287, the Mongol Ilkhan of Persia, Arghun Khan, decided to send an ambassador to Europe. His goal was to forge a military alliance with European Christian rulers against their common enemy, the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, which controlled Jerusalem and the Holy Land. Arghun chose Rabban Bar Sama for this crucial diplomatic mission, perhaps because as a Christian he might be better received in Europe. So Bar Sama set off, traveling through Constantinople to Italy. He met with cardinals in Rome. The Pope had recently died, and a new one hadn't been elected yet. Then traveled to France, where he had an audience with King Philip IV in Paris. He was amazed by the city and the University of Paris. His journey continued to Gascony, then controlled by England, where he met King Edward I of England, famously known as Longshanks. Bar Sama's own detailed travelogue, written in Syriac, describes these encounters. He and Edward discussed the proposed alliance, and Bar Sama, a monk from the other side of the world, even gave communion to the English king. He then returned to Rome and met the newly elected Pope Nicholas IV. While the European leaders were intrigued and treated Bar Sama with respect, the Grand Franco-Mongol alliance never actually materialized due to European politics and logistical challenges. Bar Sama eventually returned to Persia in 1288. His account provides a unique, non-European perspective on medieval Europe, its cities, its religious customs. He was particularly impressed by the devotion shown during Holy Week, and its rulers. It's a remarkable story of diplomacy and cross-cultural encounter, a testament to how connected the world was, even in the 13th century, well before the age of European exploration. Number 1. When Buddha looked like a Greek god, the ultimate ancient art mashup, you never too existed. Imagine strolling through an ancient city in what is now Afghanistan or Pakistan around the 2nd century CE and seeing statues of Buddha. But these aren't quite like the serene stylized Buddhas you might picture from East Asia. These Buddhas have curly hair tied in a bun, like a Greek philosopher. They wear heavy toga-like robes with realistic, flowing drapery. Some even have a distinctly Apollonian face, with sharp noses and defined features, and stand in a relaxed, naturalistic pose called contrapposto, just like classical Greek sculptures. This wasn't a weird artistic accident. It was the hallmark of Gandharan art, one of the most fascinating cultural fusions in history. How did this incredible East meets West mashup happen? It all started with Alexander the Great. In 327 BC, the Macedonian conqueror led his armies into Bactria, parts of modern Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, and then into northwestern India. Although his stay was brief, he founded several Greek cities and left behind Greek settlers and a strong Hellenistic cultural influence. After Alexander's empire, fragmented successor states like the Seleucid Empire and later the independent Greco-Bactrian kingdom and the Indo-Greek kingdom ruled over these regions for centuries. These Greek kings, thousands of miles from their Mediterranean homeland, minted coins with portraits of Greek gods like Zeus and Heracles and inscriptions in Greek. Meanwhile, Buddhism was flourishing in India, especially under the patronage of Emperor Ashoka of the Mauryan Empire in the 3rd century BCE. Ashoka actively promoted Buddhism, sending missionaries far and wide, including to the Greek-ruled areas in the northwest. The region of Gandhara, encompassing parts of modern-day Pakistan and Afghanistan, became a major crossroads where these Greek and Indian cultures met and mingled. For the first few centuries of Buddhism, Buddha himself was not depicted in human form. He was represented by symbols like an empty throne, a Bodhi tree, or footprints. But around the 1st century CE, in Gandhara and also in Mathura, India, the first images of Buddha in human form began to appear. In Gandhara, the artists drew heavily on the Hellenistic artistic traditions that had been present for generations. They sculpted Buddha with the physical characteristics and artistic conventions of Greek gods and heroes. Bodhisattvas, enlightened beings who delay their own nirvana to help others, were sometimes depicted looking like Greek heroes. For example, Virapani, a protector of Buddha, was often shown resembling the muscular Greek hero Heracles, complete with a lion skin and club. Even architectural elements from Greek temples, like Corinthian columns and friezes with cherubic figures holding garlands, were incorporated into Buddhist stupas, reliquary mounds, and monasteries. This Greco-Buddhist art wasn't just a superficial imitation, it was a vibrant new artistic language that helped to visualize and spread Buddhist teachings. Some scholars even suggest that the interaction with Greek philosophical ideas might have influenced the development of Mahayana Buddhism, with its emphasis on savior bodhisattvas and devotional practices. The thousands of Gandharan statues that survive today are a stunning testament to this remarkable cultural exchange, where the serene philosophy of the East was given form by the artistic dynamism of the West.